Well, actually, we're very aligned on that. If you think about the statements that I make in the House, if you think about every statement, global statement that I've signed New Zealand up for, the very first thing out of my mouth is actually the abhorrence of what we saw on October 7th, and actually the need for Hamas to release hostages, and the fact that there will be no role for Hamas in any future state of Palestine. That is absolutely critical. But equally, I follow that by saying we expect Israel to provide unfettered, unhindered humanitarian assistance to the human catastrophe that's unfolding in Gaza. And likewise, we expect Israel to comply and make sure they're protecting civilians as well. So I think, go back and look at the record of my consistency in my statements. But, and I'm also the Prime Minister that designated the whole of Hamas a terrorist organisation. It's one of the first things I did and early things that I did before that very reason. So, I understand Hamas, but what I'm talking about is the humanitarian catastrophe and suffering that we're seeing in Gaza. And actually, we need Israel to heed the global community's calls, which have been consistent over the period of this conflict, to make sure that humanitarian assistance is flooding in unhindered. Neutral NGOs can access and provide that humanitarian assistance, and we need to make sure civilians are protected.
They're clearly taking issue with the fact that you've said that Netanyahu has lost the plot. Have you instigated a diplomatic headache by saying that?
No, I've just expressed my personal view, which is to say that we have had a global community consistently calling for time now to say release hostages, provide humanitarian assistance, ceasefire. And that has been a consistent message time and time again. And our action, our position has been very clearly more military action and going into Gaza City in the way that we saw in the last 48 hours. None of that is helping get to a peaceful and secure situation in the Middle East.
Do you believe your National Party caucus is on side with you on this one? One of your MPs this morning said that it wasn't a phrase that he would use and he was reluctant to say that he agreed with you.
Well, again, I expressed a personal opinion, asked a question about it, and that's how I feel. I feel like, that the reality is that the global community has for a long period of time been calling for the release of hostages, humanitarian assistance, and actually a ceasefire. That's important. That's what we've been talking about in every statement we've made. That's what I talk about in the House when I'm asked questions about Israel, Gaza, and the conflict there. We are a long way away from this conflict. We have very limited connections to Israel in terms of trade ties or other things, but we stand up for values, and we want to see both Hamas to release hostages and have no future role in any future Palestinian state, and we need to also make sure that Israel is complying with its international obligations as well. No, I haven't. No, I haven't had a chance. Sorry.
Hamas has praised the Australian government for their move to recognise Palestine. Is that problematic?
Well, no. All we've done is communicated to you, earlier this week that we had our first conversation as a cabinet around our, reviewing our position on, state recognition. But as I've said to you, it's a very complex issue, and each country works its way through and takes time to do it. And we're going to do that, as you know, over the coming weeks and into September. But there's no doubt about it. There is no way that you can have Hamas having any influence or any position to play at all, and needs to disarm, release hostages, and have no future role in any state around in Palestine. That's an absolute must. So I feel very strongly about Hamas is a terrorist organisation. That's why I did designate both the political and the military wings as such when I became Prime Minister, and it's important.
But they seem to be pretty happy that more states are recognized.
Well, I'm working through the New Zealand, our view and our position, and we're doing that in a very considered way. But and there's a lot of complexity with it, and it's important. Each country has worked its way through. You've seen Spain and Norway. I spoke to their prime ministers earlier. They did it last year. You've seen France, UK, Australia do it more recently. We're going to look at our position and come to our own conclusions.
Prime Minister, just to be clear, so you do stand by your comments that...
Yeah, look, I was expressing my view. They're entitled to express their view. That's fine. But I was just saying to you, it is frustrating. All New Zealanders are seeing a human catastrophe unfold in Gaza. It's plumbed new depths. And we do not want to see forced displacement of people. We do not want to see annexation of Gaza. We want to maintain a two-state solution pathway. We don't want that extinguished.
Prime Minister, have you seen the tweet from the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel criticising your comments?
I'm aware of them, yes.
What's your response to what she says?
As I said earlier, they're entitled to their view, we're entitled to ours. What we are united on is that Hamas is a terrorist organisation. Hamas must release hostages, and I'm the Prime Minister that designated Hamas a full terrorist organisation in New Zealand, from New Zealand.
Given that response from them, do you have concerns about the willingness of Israel to come to the table? Should the government recognise Palestine, should moves happen towards a two-state solution, do you
Well, I think what I'm expressing is an immense frustration from the global community. You've seen the global community shift. We have been friends of Israel for a long period of time. We've been a believer since 1947 in the need to establish a two-state solution, that we can have a state of Palestine and a state of Israel living together in peace and stability and security. But you've seen a global community, and I've joined with as many countries as I can to put more volume to our voice and our values and our position around it. Getting increasingly frustrated that actually those calls from the global community are not being heeded at all. And so, that's what I was expressing yesterday. And when you see, we don't want to see a forced displacement of Palestinians in Gaza. We don't want to see an annexation of Gaza. We need to make sure that a two-state solution remains viable for a future. And so, but it's more about a global frustration is what you're sensing. Is we've been calling for the release of hostages. What happened on October the 7th, where 1,200 people, innocent civilians, were killed in a completely abhorrent way. And then the subsequent hostages that have been held now in horrific conditions is utterly unacceptable. And that's why I have deemed Hamas a terrorist organisation. That's why we say they must release hostages. And if it's the first thing out of my mouth on every statement that we've made publicly with other countries, or as New Zealand alone, or even when you hear me in the Parliament. So, that is a reality. Hamas must release hostages. They must disarm. There must be no future role for them in any future Palestinian state, period. They are a terrorist organisation, and as you've heard the Arab League and others say, they must disarm and disband. Those are things that we all support and encourage. Equally, we expect Israel to make sure that it is providing humanitarian assistance to what is an absolute catastrophe sitting in Gaza.
Have you sought to speak directly to Benjamin Netanyahu and express those views?
Not at this point. We're going through a process as a cabinet, as you know, as we explained earlier, to weigh up our position on Palestinian statehood, and that would be obviously a time for us to talk.
From anyone else in the Israeli government over the last few months?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Mr. Bishop,
Yes.
Mr. Bishop, do you agree that Benjamin Netanyahu has lost the plot?
Yes.
And why would you say that? What's prompted that?
Well, for precisely the reasons that the Prime Minister has really, I think, eloquently articulated, which is that Israel has gone too far when it comes to what they're doing in Gaza right now, and we all want to see a two-state solution. And at the moment, that is being put at risk by the actions of Netanyahu.
Prime Minister, on the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the COVID response, do you think that they should have summoned the former Prime Minister and Christopher Luxon and the other ministers